The early and mid-70s saw Marvin Gaye dominate music. Though he had significant success in the 1960s, his stardom would go into overdrive after his 1971 landmark album, What's Going On, bringing him into territory of international superstardom. And that momentum would continue with 2 R&B and pop-fused albums, a really strong soundtrack album, and a disappointing but still fairly successful album with Diana Ross. But all of these milestones would take place in the midst of financial ruin and 2 toxic, traumatic love affairs. And what would rise from the ashes of his turmoil would be the underrated, misunderstood classic, Hear My Dear. Today we explore an album that was born out of divorce and legal woes, commercially and critically unsuccessful at its release, but is now regarded as one of Marvin Gaye's best works. Go! Be sure to like my video and subscribe to my page. After 1973's Let's Get It On, Marvin Gaye was in rare air. That album, as well as What's Going On, were both million sellers, and he was earning a minimum of $100,000 per show. Marvin had all the leverage, and he used his stroke to negotiate a lucrative contract with Motown Records in 1975, managing to get the label to agree to build him his own studio on Sunset Boulevard and give him his own imprint. And it would pay dividends after the release of I Want You in 1976, also selling 1 million copies. And that will be followed up with a live album called Live at the London Palladium, featuring the hit #1 single, Got to Give It Up. Hit albums, hit singles, and one of the highest paid artists of his time. So it sounds almost unbelievable that with all of that success, Marvin Gaye was dead broke. Part of this was because Marvin was just genuinely bad with money. Lavish spending, combined with skipping out on paying his taxes for several years, and his expensive cocaine habit can be accounted for in his despair. Also accounted for was the near $2 million that he owed his former manager, Stephen Hill, in unpaid services. But perhaps most pressing in his immediate financial collapse was his divorce with Anna Gordy, pivot to Marvin's marriage with Anna Gordy. Marvin Gaye would marry his first wife, Anna Gordy, on June 8, 1964. Marvin was 24, while Anna was 41, a 17-year age difference. Anna was the sister of Berry Gordy, head of Marvin's label, Motown Records. So in effect, Marvin married into the family business, and in terms of power and priority, it was a smart move. But despite this partially being a lateral move for Marvin, he did genuinely love Anna. She served as motivation to keep on creating even when he didn't want to, and she kept his head on straight when he was full of self-doubt. Much of his 1960s material was inspired by his ex-wife, such as the hit single Pride and Joy. Essentially a tort song for Anna, it was a huge hit, peaking at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. The marriage would also result in the birth of their only son, Marvin Gaye III. His conception is real messy and would take more than a few seconds to talk about, but if you want a separate video on Marvin Gaye's messy love life, let me know in the comments. The reality of the situation was that despite all of the love that the two felt for each other, it was a volatile relationship, ripe with jealousy, mental, and physical abuse. Anna had many instances in which she was violent towards her husband, and there was infidelity on both parts. By the 70s, Marvin would counter Anna's violence with his own, and there wasn't a whole lot that was keeping them together. The final song on Marvin Gaye's Let's Get It On album, titled Just to Keep You Satisfied, is a painful reflection of their relationship. I stood all the jealousy, all the bitching too. Yes, I'd forget it all once I was in bed with you. Ooh baby, how can we live like this? Ooh baby, let me reminisce. In many ways, you can consider this a prequel to Hear My Dear, vulnerable, sad as hell, and a public outing of the two's tense relationship. The couple would completely separate the same year of Let's Get It On's release, and any possibility of the two reconciling was completely thrown out the window once Marvin began to publicly date Janice Hunter. Janice Hunter was the daughter of famous jazz musician Slim Gaillard. Her mother was dating Ed Townsend, head songwriter on Let's Get It On, and he would decide to bring her to some of the sessions for that album. And once Marvin met Hunter, he became instantly infatuated with her. I'll explain why I use the word infatuated as opposed to a word like in love or smitten real soon. Cool? The two spent every moment with each other, and she more or less served as the muse for that album, as well as its follow-up, I Want You. There were just two major problems with their relationship. Firstly, Marvin was still legally married, and Janice's presence only made his relationship with his wife worse. Secondly, Marvin Gaye was 34, and Janice Hunter was 17. So basically, Marvin Gaye ended a relationship with a woman that was 17 years older than him in order to start a relationship with a woman that was 17 years younger than him. From groom to groomer. Another long-winded, complicated relationship that will require its own video, but in short, Marvin and Janice had a sometimes loving, but overall destructive relationship. With Marvin obviously having a greater power dynamic between the two. But their relationship would produce two children in 1974 and 1975, a daughter named Nona and a son named Frankie. 1975 would also be the year that Anna had enough. Unable to take Marvin blatantly throwing his barely legal girlfriend around in her face, she would file for divorce. And that divorce was expensive. Real expensive. So expensive that he would begin to fall behind on his alimony payments. Courts would demand that he pay Anna $6,000 a month, $5,500 for Anna and $500 for their son Marvin III. But from Anna's perspective, it wasn't that he couldn't pay the alimony, he simply didn't want to. In court records, Anna would state that Marvin told her the following: "Baby, there isn't any court that's gonna tell me what to do. I'm not going to obey any court order no matter what they're trying to do to me. The only thing I'm gonna do is take off my hat when I enter the courtroom. Other than that, I'm doing nothing." Good goshamole. In September of 1976, a warrant was issued for Marvin Gaye's arrest, being officially charged with contempt of court. And Marvin would go into hiding for several days, claiming that he was on tour to make some extra money. Eventually, Marvin would file for bankruptcy, claiming financial hardship. He and Anna's divorce was finalized on May 4th, 1977, and Anna would demand $1 million in the settlement. But Marvin would still claim to be destitute due to lavish spending and bad investments, so his lawyer Curtis Shaw would come up with a solution. He would propose that Anna be paid a grand total of $600,000, $305,000 of which would come from the advance of Marvin's next album. The remaining $295,000 would come from the sales that Marvin would make on his next album. If that album was unable to recoup the $295,000 within 2 years, Marvin would be on the hook for that money. Anna and Marvin both liked the idea, so it was settled. The divorce would be paid for through Marvin's music. Completely free to have a life with Janice, the two would marry in October of 1977. And now with the legal obligation to fulfill, Marvin would begin to work on the album that will become Hear My Dear. Marvin would begin production on Hear My Dear on March 24th, 1977. Coming into it, his mentality was simple. Create a basic, forgettable album that meets the terms of his settlement. Nothing expansive, nothing necessarily even good. Why should I break my neck when Anna was gonna wind up with the money anyway? His approach to creation was also different. As opposed to having people write songs for him, he decided to write the majority of the songs by himself. Usually he would take something pre-recorded or do some freestyling on his piano and just mumble things until he felt like he had the right lyrics, and from then on, he would go and record it. And it's evident because compared to his previous albums, which feel a little bit more structured in song, everything on Hear My Dear feels a lot more freeform in its presentation. And a lot of the songs are 5, 6, sometimes even 7 minutes long, where he's just spitting bar after bar, some of which don't even rhyme. And as he got adjusted to this new process, something in Marvin changed. He began to greatly grieve his failed marriage. The good and the bad, the pretty and the shitty. And that pain would inspire him to take the album more seriously. Marvin could be a spiteful, petty person, and he would exhibit that in both of his relationships. But his pettiness was exceeded by his artistic integrity, and he felt as if he owed not just himself, but his fans a good project. I sang and sang until I drained myself of everything I'd lived through. But Here My Dear isn't just a heartbreak album, it is a window into Marvin Gaye and his wife's private love life. The self-titled opener is a cold declaration that this will be a story of sorrow, mentioning the alimony case that Anna put Marvin through, as well as almost mockingly saying, "This is what you wanted." Marvin was most distraught about Anna apparently using their son to get back at him. "You don't have the right to use a son of mine to keep me in line." I Met a Little Girl is a brief synopsis on their relationship, the moment that they met, and a few of the moments that made them fall out of love with each other. He even sings his wedding vows, and you even hear him sing 1964, the year of their marriage. That is followed up by When Did You Stop Loving Me? When Did I Stop Loving You? And the animosity goes into overdrive. Marvin speaks on having to leave Anna for the sake of his physical and mental health, and also says that she called the police on him. What I don't understand is if you love me, how could you turn me into the police? Likely also in reference to their alimony case. Perhaps this is the most devastated that he gets. Moving on to Anger, a song in which Marvin admits that anger has taken over his soul and made him sick. Most notable in this song is him speaking on him becoming someone that he doesn't like. In short, you can learn a lot about yourself when you're mad. Then we get to Is It Enough, a song that mostly speaks on Anna, the toxic woman, calling out her possessiveness and his belief that no matter what good he did, it would never be enough to please her. It turns out that this song was created after one of their many court appearances, and many of the lyrics do reflect that. "What could I do?" the judge said. "She gotta keep on living the way she accustomed to." The fairly long 5-minute interlude, Everybody Needs Love, is a quick change of pace, because we get a few songs that don't focus on divorce. It uses the same instrumental as the title track, but the message is way different. We as humans and as an earth need to be loved. From his father, who he had a very tense relationship with, even to the flowers and the bluebirds. My favorite part is when he yells out, "I'm talking about love." Both Time to Get It Together and Sparrow are actually self-assessments, acknowledging his flaws that are holding him back from being a better person, combined with reflections on how he feels he can give to the world with his art. And now back to dropping these TMI songs about his ex-wife with Anna song. This song is just a little less acrimonious and gives time to talk about the sweet, tender moments in their relationship. The times where they would take baths in milk and lay together in satin sheets. You really hear that strain, especially when he begins to sing in crescendo her name. Emphasis on a little bit less acrimonious though, because there's still a bit of shade there. He speaks on the two sleeping in separate rooms and Anna's materialism. "Keep on loving me, baby, cross the hall." Moving on to a funky space reincarnation, this one is quite interesting. There's a lot of George Clinton influence here, and it speaks on Marvin meeting Anna in a different dimension. But the outcome is still the same. The two cannot make it work. It's basically a message stating that no matter where these two are, they are not meant to be. And this is followed up with a real on-the-nose title. Ready? "You can leave, but it's gonna cost you." No need to explain. It's more of Marvin dissing Anna. But the final track on the album is far more reflective, Falling in Love Again. Marvin talks about his new relationship with Janice. The general theme is that despite his failed marriage, he still has a lot of hope and love inside of him, and he really wants to make this new one work. "She's pretty, outside and in. She's so wonderful, I tried not to let my heart step in." Nice, hopeful end to an otherwise pitiful record. Every song was written by Marvin, with assistance from Ed Townsend. Like all of his 70s albums, he layers all the stacks and harmonies himself with so much beauty. But perhaps more than all of his other albums, he blends genres so seamlessly. Production for Here My Dear would end on July 9th, 1978, and what Marvin would create was an incredibly poignant snapshot on his life behind closed doors. Undoubtedly his most revealing record, and quite invasive against his wife. But Marvin would at least be decent enough to allow Anna to hear it before its release, inviting her to the studio. While not in his presence, she would listen to the album in full, and without a word said, simply leave when she was done. In his mind, Marvin succeeded in producing a quality project. But now it was time for the critics and the public to judge. Hear My Dear was released as a double album on December 16, 1978. The album art is quite interesting, featuring a Roman statue of Marvin standing next to another statue of two lovers as they kiss. But the back art tells the real story. There's a game of Monopoly being played. On one side, there's $1 and a bunch of pieces that symbolize music, from a piano to a recorder. This side is Marvin, symbolizing that he has nothing but his music. The other side has several dollars and contains several pieces that symbolize luxury, including a house and a car, symbolizing Anna and the fact that she's taken everything from Marvin. Marvin's hand is giving a record piece to Anna's hand, explaining the meaning of the title. Here's your album, Hear My Dear. Again, Petty Man. It would peak at number 26 on the Billboard 200 and number 4 on the Billboard R&B charts. For Marvin Gaye, these were poor numbers compared to his earlier work. 1 million albums were shipped, but it's unknown as to how many albums were actually sold. That said, it hasn't been certified gold or platinum, indicating that the sales are quite low. Marvin would tell the press that this album was meant to be a support system for men that are never allowed to tell their story during a bad breakup. But that explanation meant very little to the press because this album received mixed reviews. Though publications like Jet Magazine, the New York Times, and the Village Voice would praise Marvin for his raw lyricism and complex instrumentation, most other reviewers would deem the album weird, rambling, and a little bit too confessional. The negative reviews got to Marvin, and he would stop heavily promoting the album shortly after its release. When you take into account his then 18 years with Motown Records, this was his first bona fide failure since his first early releases with the label in the 1960s, so he took it really hard. Marvin would take his son Frankie and go on a self-imposed exile for several years, living in Maui out of a bread truck. But his lack of promotional presence didn't really make much of a difference. Of the two singles that he would release, A Funky Space Reincarnation and Anger, neither of them would hit the Billboard 100, and only the former would hit number 23 on the Billboard R&B singles chart. In his absence, a bigger storm would brew with Anna. She was deeply hurt by the album's release and considered filing a $5 million lawsuit against Marvin for invasion of privacy. But eventually she would be talked down from the idea. Motown would stop promoting the album in early 1979, and that would end the rollout of Marvin Gaye's masterpiece birthed out of anger, sadness, and quartz. When the dust settled, Hear My Dear would cause Marvin Gaye to go on a years-long spiral that he wouldn't really recover from until the early 1980s. His marriage with Janice would also fall apart through the couple's drug dependency, sexual manipulation, and domestic violence, finally divorcing in 1982. And his money problems would only get worse, leaving Motown Records in 1981 and beginning a journey of recovery when he moved to Belgium. That exile would do wonders for Marvin's psyche, and he would see himself back on the music charts with the release of 1982's Sexual Healing. When I get that feeling, I want sexual healing. Though Anna was initially hurt by the release of Hear My Dear, she would soften her stance through time. It's taken me a while, but I've come to appreciate every form of Marvin's music. She'd also managed to repair her relationship with Marvin, and the two would have a solid platonic relationship prior to his death in 1984. As for the alimony owed to her, Marvin was unable to recoup that $295,000, and he would be on the hook for that payment for the remainder of his life. At its initial release, Hear My Dear was a commercial and critical bomb. But in the wake of Marvin's passing, music listeners would begin to praise the album for its compelling storytelling and raw emotion used to create a captivating piece of art. At its 1994 re-release, it would hit number 1 on the Billboard R&B charts. And it would receive the ultimate accolade, being featured on all 3 of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest album lists. At its core, Hear My Dear is a vindictive piece of art meant to shame its subject. but much of his content is a powerful admittance of hurt and imperfection. And in revisiting this project, I believe that it should be praised for its blending of R&B, doo-wop, and jazz so effortlessly, for its insistence on expression despite what anybody may feel about it. Marvin Gaye created a heartbreak album that anybody going through a bad breakup can relate to. And all good art is relatable to someone. But what did you think about Marvin Gaye's Here My Dear? Let me know in the comments.